The Sun seems motionless, a perfect beacon at the center of an orderly system. And yet, if one observes it patiently, it tells a story of tiny, stubborn errors. A story in which a planet that does not exist, hidden in a glare between the edge of Mercury and the Sun's light, becomes the key to understanding what gravity truly is. Not a mysterious force acting at a distance, like a well-cast spell, but a property of space and time themselves, a fold in the fabric of the universe. To arrive at this change in perspective, however, one must cross a century of calculations, rivalries, eclipses, sunspots mistaken for worlds, and a question that at a certain point becomes inevitable. What if the problem were not Mercury, but the laws with which we describe the sky? Mercury is an ungrateful target. It is close to the Sun, always low on the horizon, visible only for brief windows after sunset or before dawn, when the air is often turbulent and the twilight light blurs details. Moreover, its orbit is particularly eccentric, more flattened than Earth's, and this makes the geometry of its motion more delicate to reconstruct. It is not enough to draw an elegant circle and set it in motion. One must measure with precision, accumulate data for years, compare observations made under different conditions, and then insert everything into a model that accounts for the perturbations of the other planets. Because in the real world there are no two isolated bodies. The Sun pulls Mercury, but Venus disturbs it a little, and Earth, and Mars, and above all the giants like Jupiter, which with their mass slowly shift the dynamic architecture of the entire system. It is precisely here that a subtle and fascinating phenomenon appears: the precession of the perihelion. The perihelion is the point of an orbit at which a planet passes closest to the Sun. If the orbit were a perfect, immutable ellipse, that point would always remain in the same direction. But because of perturbations, the ellipse slowly rotates in space. It is as if the orbit were not a simple closed reign, but a figure that, turn after turn, shifts by an imperceptible fraction. Over the course of decades, this rotation becomes measurable. 19th-century astronomers were already capable of measuring tiny differences, on the order of arcseconds, that is, very small fractions of a degree. An arcsecond is 1/3600th of a degree. It is a unit that seems invented for human humility, because it forces us to reason about quantities invisible to the naked eye. And yet, for Mercury, something did not add up. Add together all the known perturbations, consider the influence of the other planets, correct for observational errors, and the precession of the perihelion still came out too large. The total value explainable by Newtonian dynamics and planetary perturbations was about 527 arcseconds per century, already a small quantity in itself. But a residue remained, about 43 arcseconds per century, that stubbornly refused to disappear. 43. A number that almost seems like a whim, and yet it was a crack in the most solid masonry of classical physics. In the mid-19th century, one man decides not to tolerate that crack. Urbain Le Verrier, the same mathematician and astronomer who had guided the discovery of Neptune with his calculations, tackles the problem with a geometric obsession. If the universe obeys Newton's equations, then every deviation must have a material cause. If Mercury moves as if it were being pulled by something more, then there must be something more. The logic was almost irresistible, because it had already worked. Neptune had been found precisely in this way, as a response to an anomaly in Uranus's orbit. Why not repeat the trick? The idea takes shape: an intramercurial planet, close to the Sun, difficult to see, but massive enough to add that small missing contribution. A body that could orbit at a small distance, on the order of a few fractions of an astronomical unit, completing a revolution in a few weeks. It is christened Vulcan, a perfect name for a world that should live in the most merciless heat and light. From that moment, the hunt begins. It is a peculiar hunt, because it is not a matter of searching for a luminous point in the dark, as one usually does with planets, but of looking for a shadow on the surface of the Sun. If Vulcan exists, it can manifest itself in two ways: as a small black disk crossing the Sun during the transit, or as a tiny point near the solar corona during a total eclipse, when the Moon obscures the dazzling disk and allows what is normally buried in the light to emerge. And here the story becomes human, with all the fragility of difficult observations. A country doctor, Edmund Lescarbault, a passionate observer, reports having seen a small dark spot cross the Sun on an afternoon in March 1859. Not a blurred, irregular sunspot, but something round, sharp, mobile. He records times, positions, details, with modest instruments and with that almost clinical attention that comes from the habit of measuring. Leverrier goes to see him, questions him, tests him, looks for the trick, the error, the illusion. In the end, however, he accepts it. And for a brief period, Vulcan seems to become real. Estimates circulate. Distance from the Sun, orbital inclination, a period of revolution just over 19 days. It is as if a void in the theory had finally found a body to fill it. But a planet, to be a planet, must show itself again, must be observed, measured, found again. And here, quietly, the problem begins. Years pass and reports multiply, but they rarely coincide. Some say they saw a point during an eclipse, others speak of 2 points, still others see nothing at all. In a field where sunlight can create reflections, where a telescope can produce ghost images, where a sunspot can change appearance in a few hours, the line between discovery and illusion is thin. Organized campaigns, those with multiple observers and stricter protocols, often return silence. Vulcan does not appear when it should. And the more rigorous the search becomes, the more its presence fades, as if it were made of the same substance as desires. Evident only when one wants to see it. At the beginning of the 20th century, a new, cold and merciless weapon enters the scene: photography. During some eclipses, instruments designed to capture multiple images of the Sun and the corona are used precisely for this purpose. If an intramercurial planet passed nearby, it would leave a clear trace on a photographic plate. A defined point, replicable, measurable, immune to the illusions of memory. But the plates show nothing. No shadow, no point, no Vulcan. At that point, the question returns with greater force, because Mercury's anomaly has not disappeared. It is still there, 43 arcseconds per century, a residue that no longer has a body to cling to. And when an effect remains without a cause, intelligence is forced into a leap. Change the cause, change the law, change the framework in which one reasons. It is in this landscape of uncertainty that Albert Einstein works on general relativity. He is not simply adjusting a number. He is changing the very definition of gravity. In the Newtonian view, gravity is a force that acts between masses at a distance. It works extremely well, with extraordinary precision, for most astronomical and terrestrial phenomena. But it leaves a philosophical and physical question. How can one mass influence another through empty space, instantaneously, without a medium? Newton himself was troubled by this. Einstein takes that unease and turns it into geometry. If space and time are a single fabric, space-time, then mass and energy do not pull objects like invisible strings. They curve that fabric. And objects follow the most natural possible paths in that curved fabric, like marbles on a deformed surface. This idea seems almost poetic, but it is made of hard, complex equations, and above all of measurable consequences. General relativity does not only say that gravity is curvature. It says how much curvature there is, how it changes, how it propagates. And precisely because it is a quantitative theory, it must pay its price before the data. Einstein knows this. He knows that without an experimental foothold he could build a perfect but empty mathematical cathedral. And this is why Mercury becomes more than a planet, it becomes a judge. When Einstein applies his equations to the motion of a planet near the Sun, he discovers that the orbit is not a closed ellipse in curved spacetime. The curvature introduces a small correction that makes the axis of the orbit rotate. It is a minimal effect, almost invisible in the short term, but inevitable. Each revolution adds a tiny fraction, and over many orbits it accumulates. For Mercury, which is the planet closest to the Sun, the effect is stronger than for the others. And when the calculation is done, the number that comes out is precisely the one that was missing. About 43 arcseconds per century. Not a generic value, not an order of magnitude, but that precise residue that had fueled Vulcan's fantasy for decades. Imagine the psychological impact of that moment. It is not just a confirmation. It is the sensation that the world, for an instant, ceases to be opaque and allows a glimpse of its structure. Einstein, who for years had struggled with mathematics and with the very idea of curving spacetime, finds confirmation precisely where classical physics had failed, and he finds it without introducing invisible planets, without ad hoc hypotheses. The anomalous precession is not a defect of the solar system. It is a window onto the geometry of the universe. This relativistic correction also exists for the other planets, but it decreases rapidly with distance from the Sun. For Venus it is a few arcseconds per century, for Earth even less, and gradually it becomes increasingly difficult to measure. Mercury was special not because it was capricious, but because it lives more immersed in the curvature produced by the Sun. It is as if it orbited closer to a valley in spacetime, where geodesics, the natural paths, differ slightly from those we would imagine in flat space. The difference is minimal, but nature does not need large differences to be true. It needs coherent differences. From that point on, general relativity begins to be tested in many ways. The deflection of starlight during an eclipse, for example, shows that even photons follow curvature, and that the Sun can behave like a lens. Time itself flows at different rates in different gravitational fields, an effect that today must be corrected for in satellite navigation systems to avoid positional errors. And then there are gravitational waves, ripples in spacetime produced by extreme events, and black holes, regions in which curvature becomes so intense as to create a boundary beyond which light does not return. All of this arises from the same idea that resolves the fate of Mercury's perihelion. Gravity is not a pull, it is a shape. And so Vulcan, the planet that is not there, what was it really? Not just an error. It was a passage. A way in which science, faithful to its own rules, tried to save an extraordinarily effective theory by pushing it to the limit. First one looks for material causes compatible with known laws. One introduces a planet because it is a natural hypothesis, because experience with Neptune had taught that the sky can hide invisible masses. Then one measures better, invents instruments, photographs eclipses, seeks repeatability. When the planet refuses to be captured, one does not insist forever. One returns to the problem and changes the question. It is a process that seems slow, sometimes confused, sometimes full of dead ends. But it is precisely those dead ends that often lead to a door that did not exist before. There is an almost ironic detail in all this. Mercury, a tiny point difficult to see, a planet that shows itself only in the uncertain hours between night and day, forced humanity to modify the very idea of gravity. A residue of 43 arcseconds per century, a quantity that at first glance would not even deserve a sigh, demolished the need for a phantom planet and supported one of the deepest theories ever built. It is as if the universe preferred to speak in a whisper, leaving patience and precision to decipher the message. And if one looks at the present, the lesson remains alive. Every time an orbit seems to behave strangely, every time galaxies rotate too fast, every time a set of distant objects shows unusual alignments, the same alternative resurfaces. There is something we do not see, or there is something we do not understand about the laws. Sometimes the answer is a new object. Other times it is a new concept. The hunt for missing planets, real or imaginary, is not just a hunt in the dark. It is a way of questioning gravity itself, of asking whether we are reading its grammar correctly. Mercury continues to orbit, indifferent, and its perihelion continues to precess. It does not do so to signal the presence of a hidden world in flames, but to remind us that spacetime is not a rigid stage on which the actors move. It is part of the plot. And when a theory manages to turn a stubborn detail into an inevitable consequence, then that detail becomes more than a number. It becomes proof that reality, beneath the surface of the everyday, is made of geometry, and that even an almost invisible planet can become the threshold of a revolution. If you have made it this far, it means you love curiosity as much as we do. If you enjoyed this journey, leave a like, write a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It is the best way to support what we do. Your presence truly makes a difference. Until the next exploration.